In this video, I'm going to solve the inequality in question number 22. So we have the quantity a plus 4 times the quantity a plus 3 times the quantity a minus 1 is all greater than 0, and we want to find the values of a for which this is a true statement. So what I'll do is I'll start by writing each of these factors separately and then put a number line next to each one. Now I've labeled each of these number lines with the values that would make each of these expressions equal to 0. So for example, if a were equal to -4, then a plus 4 would equal 0. So I've got this labeled at -4, then a plus 3, I have labeled at -3, a minus 1 is labeled at +1. And so I have these three number lines, and I really don't bother filling in all of the numbers in the number line. It's not really necessary. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make kind of a dashed vertical line. It's really kind of like an asymptote. So I made that through all three of those lines, and now what I can do is decide, is the expression positive or negative for each of the intervals. So I've got 4 intervals now. I've got the first interval, second interval, third interval, and then fourth interval. And I have that for each of the factors. So for each individual factor, I'm going to determine, is the factor positive or negative in this particular interval. So I'll start with a plus 4, and what happens if the value of a is less than -4? For example, it could be -5. If I plug that in, -5 plus 4 gives me a -1. So we have a negative less than -4. And here's where 0 is. So on one side of 0, you have negative, and now I'm going to check for the other side of 0. I have to go through 0 in order to change sign, so the only place that this can change sign from negative to positive or positive to negative is when we have 0 here. So now I'm going to check a value that's greater than -4, say, for example, -3, and that is going to give me +1. So anywhere that the graph is greater than -4, we're going to have a positive value for that particular factor. Now I'm going to try the same thing for a plus 3, and here's where the factor is equal to 0. So we have one thing on one side, so it's either positive or negative on one side of that 0, and then either positive or negative on the other side of 0. So I choose a number that's less than -3, say for example -4, and that gives me a negative. So I'm going to have negative here and negative here because both of those intervals are less than -3. And then I try a number greater than -3, like -2, and that's going to give me a positive. So we'll have a positive from then on. And then finally I look at a minus 1, and if I plug in a value less than 1, I'm going to get a negative. And plug in a value greater than 1, and you get a positive. So now, because these three factors are all multiplied together, I'm going to multiply their signs. So a negative times a negative times a negative is going to give me a negative. A positive times a negative gives me a positive. And then we have negative and we have positive. Now, they don't have to alternate like this, but very, very often they do. And now, again, I go back to check to see what we're looking for in this particular problem. And we're looking for values that are greater than 0, so those are positive numbers. So we're going to use these two intervals, and I'm going to start at -4 and go to -3, and then from 1 to infinity. And I know I have a parenthesis on infinity, and because there's no equal to underneath the greater than sign, it's going to be parentheses on everything. So we have -4 to -3, not including either -4 or -3, and then 1 to infinity, not including the 1. And of course we never include infinity because it's not actually a number. And so that's how you solve that problem.